Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia, and today it is Friday Reads for October 6th. For once, I know what day it is because yesterday was my birthday, and a very fine day it was. And I am very happy to be here on Friday Reads because I wasn't here last week. I was out of town, so I have kind of quite a few books to talk about today, and I'm excited to get to all of them. Let's see. First of all, I really have nothing interesting to say about TV viewing. Reservation Dogs has ended. So if you have been waiting for me to stop talking about that show, your wish comes true today. And if you've been waiting for the entire series, which is 3 seasons, to finish dropping, your wish has also come true. So the British baking show did start, so that is the consolation prize. And other than that, we're trying to get to the end. I think there's one episode left of the Changeling, and I still do not understand what the heck is going on, but we're still watching it. So I feel like I'm going to have to get all the way to the end before I can say whether I even recommend it, because it just keeps going in all these different directions. But we really need to get right into the books because there is a bumper crop here. So let us discuss. When last we spoke about my reads, I was reading Prophet Song by Paul Lynch, and I was almost at the end, and I did finish it. And boy, this book is very dark. It is like Paul Lynch overheard people talking about the road being really bleak and depressing, and he said, hold my beer, because this book it's dark, it's disturbing, dreary, depressing, dystopic. I mean, it's a lot of D words. And it's just really intense, and it's unrelenting. The pace of it, the way it's structured with the absence of breaks, adds to the feeling of just the propulsion of terrible things that are happening in this envisioning of a totalitarian takeover in Ireland. The last part of the book that I hadn't yet talked about, the pace really speeds up and becomes very suspenseful. I don't want to say too much about it because it would be spoilers, but I also felt that was really the most realistic part of the book if you want to compare what's happening in the book to current day situations or recent situations. And also, I would say this book, I haven't, okay, to be fair, I only have read a handful of the Booker contenders. And as far as the finalists, I think I've read 3 of the 6. And I probably liked If I Survive You the best of those 3. This would be a second, and this other Eden in third. I would say, but for all of them, they were books that I liked but did not love. There's certain things I thought were strong about them, and I enjoyed reading them, and I wouldn't discourage anyone else from reading them, but I didn't love them or put them on my top 10 list. And this I think will be the same. Might make the top 20, but I'm not sure because I've really read some strong books this year. And what really held me back was not anything about the format at all. I thought that was a great choice. It was Eilish, the main character, and how frustrating she was and how agonizingly slow she was to wake up and take action about what was going on. She clung to the structures of her familiar life. She engaged in petty standoffs with her sister, who very knowingly said early on in the book that history is a silent record of people who did not know when to leave. And just because that message came from her sister, she doesn't, that's one thing that sets her back from taking action. But it's also heartbreaking because Eilish's decisions are made from a place of wanting to keep her family stable and safe, but they end up having the opposite effect, and it's just really hard to watch that unfold and without wanting to jump in and intervene into the mess. So, but that was Prophet Song, and it was a real downer. It is a good book, but it is definitely very bleak. Before I go any further, I forgot to show off my shirt, And let me just get so you can see. I really like this one. It has a little attitude, but I like it. After Prophet Song, I felt the need to overcorrect for my mood, and so I picked what I felt would be the fluffiest book out of my cart, which is Parnassus on Wheels by Christopher Morley. And I know I looked this up before, but I've already forgotten again about when this book was published. Okay, first published in 1917, and this is the story of a woman, a 40-year-old woman who lives on a farm, and she lives with her brother who has become a successful writer. And when he first began to experience some success, he had plucked her out of a tedious job she had as a governess and brought her out. And they live on this farm where she does all of the cooking and mending and sewing. And it kind of gave me Anna Green Gables vibes with this husband, not, I mean, a brother and sister, but kind of fulfilling husband and wife roles. But, not in a creepy way. But he goes off on book tours a lot, and she, even though she's very good at what she does, she's kind of there's a creeping resentment starting to come in that she's not aware of until one day when this man shows up with a bookmobile, a horse-drawn bookmobile, and that is Parnassus on wheels. Pegasus is the horse, and he has shown up at the farm because he wants to sell the whole apparatus to her brother, thinking that this is a man who has some money and that might be interested in the books. And his plan is that he's enjoyed this job, but he wants to sell it and go back to his home in Brooklyn, where he is working on a novel. And she decides on a whim to go and grab her savings. She just decides, you know what, I'm kind of tired of this situation. I want a new gig. So she goes and grabs her money and gets in the wagon with this guy, and off they go. And the idea is that he's going to ride with her for part of the way and kind of show her the ropes of how this works. And then he's going to catch a train and go home to Brooklyn. So an adventure begins, and it is a very charming adventure. It's a light book. It's a funny book. You can see some of the things that are going to happen in the plot a mile away, but you don't care because that's why you're reading the book to begin with. I'm holding it like there's something interesting to look at here on this book with no jacket, but anyway, Parnassus on Wheels was fun, and I highly recommend it for either shorty September or any time that you just need something light and funny and undemanding. So after I finished that book, I was on the eve of my trip, and I didn't want to start a book. I had a book already, you'll hear about in a minute, that I had set aside for the trip. So I went back to a book that I would not describe as light, funny, and undemanding, Bloodchild by Octavia Butler. And I read the remainder of the stories in this collection. And also there's 2 essays on writing at the end as well. And as I mentioned before, each story has her commentaries afterward about what she was thinking when she wrote the story, what inspired her, what was on her mind. And it's really interesting. It makes you kind of wish that you could always access that. You think about books and stories that just left you puzzled in some way or wondering about the author, and wouldn't it be nice if they always had something to chip in for you? But anyway, I did read the rest of these. My favorite stories in the collection were Bloodchild, which I talked about during my short story project, and also a story called Speech Sounds. Now, this was really fascinating, and it is a kind of a post-pandemic kind of story. And I could imagine this being a novel or a movie. I'm going to set this down. But Speech Sounds is what we're imagining here is that there has been some kind of an illness that has swept the world, and it has left people all disabled in their communication skills. For the most part, nobody can talk anymore. They hear fine, but they can't talk, and a lot of people are intellectually impaired to where they have difficulty even communicating in non-speech methods. And they have trouble with their emotional regulation, so frustration and anger bubble out frequently in public, and they are upset with the few people who actually have retained their speech skills. Most people can also not read, so they can't write and pass notes either. So in this story, a woman gets on a bus, and like the bus driver has photos for things, you know, the rules on the bus or his services or whatever, and something bubbles up on the bus and a big fight breaks out. And in the course of this whole situation, we find out that she actually can talk, but she has to conceal this because it is not an accepted anomaly. And we also find out that most of the people who have a higher functioning level are the left-handed people. Yay for lefties! And in the course of this melee, she meets another man who is also left-handed, and while he cannot speak, he can still read. And so there is a connection between the two of them. I can't tell you anything else that happens, but it is short, impactful, tragic, thought-provoking, and frightening. And I really enjoyed it, and thinking about what that world could actually be like, and where would I fit into that world, because I am left-handed, and so is Stephen. So anyway, that was Bloodchild, which I really enjoyed, and it has not slowed me down in my need to pursue more Octavia Butler. Then I did have time for one more little shorty before my trip, and that was So Long a Letter by Mariama Bob. And this was a reread. I took an African fiction class many years ago when I was in graduate school. So I did a master's in English, and I took a class. There was a professor at my college that was one of his specialties. And this was one of my favorite books from that class, and I still had it, and so I decided to reread it for Shorty September. And it is an epistolary novel written by a woman to a very dear friend of hers on the occasion of the letter writer. Her husband has passed away, but they have been living apart for several years because, oh, I forgot to tell you, this takes place in Senegal. And it is legal to take an additional wife, but it is also not necessarily a popular decision for the original wife involved, which is what happens here. A woman who has been married for decades and has raised a large family, and she's a teacher, and she thought of her husband as her partner, and he decides to marry a second wife who is a very, very young woman who is actually one of her daughter's friends. She's not happy about this. And the same thing more or less happened to her good friend that she's writing to, who's, her name is Asatal. Ramatulaye is the lady writing the story. But Asatal, when her husband did this, she divorced him, which was a pretty radical act in their culture at the time. But Ramatulaye does not do this. She just lives apart. But in the course of this time, she becomes more independent and more assertive for herself. So when he passes away, she's going through this period, this traditional mourning period, and having a lot of time to herself. And that is when she's composing this gradual letter. It's really interesting to see how she navigates to a place of self-respect, independence, a type of feminism within a traditional structure, and without going outside of the boundaries of her religion and traditions that she respects. And it gives her insight into some different ways that she wants to finish raising her daughters. So that brings us up to the trip. And I don't know about you, but I have talked before about how much time I spend dithering just over what book to read next. So you can imagine when I'm picking something out for a trip. And, there's a lot of things that impact this, because I have to think about, well, what kind of trip? Is it a car trip or an airplane trip? Is it a vacation or a family visit? Is there some sort of event or purpose for why I'm going that will affect my available reading time? How many days is it? Am I staying in a hotel or at somebody's house? All of these things factor into what type of book and how much book I need. So for this particular, having said all that, for this particular trip, I chose The Stromness Dinner by Peter Benson. And I am absolutely, I nailed it. This was the perfect book for this trip. It was the perfect length, it was the perfect tone. A lot of times I pick mysteries or thrillers, but I wasn't really feeling that. This time I wanted something, I don't know, just different. So I did choose this based on some recent great reviews of this book. And first of all, the length was absolutely perfect. I started reading this on the plane ride there and I finished it on the plane ride back. This is the first book I have read by Peter Benson. This was absolutely delightful. This is the story of Ed Beach, and Ed Beach is one of my favorite characters of this reading year. And Ed Beach, we find out at the beginning, the very first paragraph lets you know, my dad and I were beach building services. We did all kinds of work, no job too small. You called us, you told us what you needed. We'd turn up with a tape measure and a pencil. We'd give you a quote. If you liked the quote, we'd do the job. If the quote didn't suit, we'd leave you alone. We were easy. We were beach building services. We were based in Bermondsey, which is an area of London. So Ed is a builder. He remodels kitchens. He makes repairs. If it gets too complicated and they need a plumber or an electrician, they've got a guy. And Ed lives at home with his dad that he works with and his mom and his sister who's a nurse. And these are two adults who live at home and help because it just makes financial sense. They all contribute to the mortgage and the housing cost. And guess what? There is nothing dark or twisted about this family. There is no horrible secret or abusive person or anything awful. They're just kind of normal. They don't agree about everything. They have differences of political opinion, but they work it out and they really like each other. Ed's family has a phone use rule that they don't have phones at the table when they're eating, which a lot of families do. But they're all adults. And the best part is when Ed is by himself eating, he still follows the rule. Even if he's in a restaurant or even in his own home or somewhere, he follows the rule because it's the family rule, and I just love that. So Ed is now it makes it sound like he's kind of simple, and he's not. He's actually he's a big thinker. He wasn't a particularly academically oriented guy in school, but he has a really inquiring mind, and his mind just goes all over all kinds of topics during this book. And another thing to know about Ed is that he is an excellent cook, and he loves to cook. He loves food. He's a big, hungry guy, and the descriptions of food in this book are just fabulous. He makes a lot of food that I would never eat because I'm a vegetarian, but I still loved the descriptions of the care that he put into it, and then his pleasure of the food is some of the best scenes in the story. So anyway, basically the plot is that Ed, so he has these jobs, and in the course of this, they are redoing a kitchen for this guy named Marcus, who's about his age, but it's a wealthy guy in a kind of a gentrifying part of town. And while he's doing the job, Marcus gets word that his father has passed away. And so a few weeks later, Marcus calls Ed and tells him that he and his sister Claire are inheriting their dad's home up in Stromness, which is in the Orkney Islands. And could he come up there for about a week and get the house ready to sell? It just needs some minor repairs, paint work, nothing major, but just it needs an overall spruce up and to clean out a bunch of stuff that's in the house that they just don't either have time or the emotional bandwidth to do all these things right now. So Ed decides that this will be a little adventure and a change of scene, and he takes the job. So we get the pleasure of Ed's trip to Stromness and then the time that he spent there, which turns out to be really a special time for Ed and a turning point in his life. And I'm not going to tell you anything more about the plot because that would spoil the joy of this story. But just really what makes it great is Ed. His personality, his narration, and there are many great scenes in this book where he just starts to ruminate on something, and it's funny and thoughtful, and things that you might have thought about yourself. Like, you just start to wonder, what would the world be like if beer had not been invented? Ed just observes, he listens, he stores things away. There's also a mini mystery in the book about an object of value that has gone missing from this home, and Ed's attempts to sleuth this out, which are entertaining as well. But I'm just going to read one little piece. There's so many good pieces in here, but here's just one piece. When Ed is on the way and he's passing through kind of a barren area, and it kind of reminded me of a place that I pass through a lot out here in South Texas, where all the wind turbines are, and it's just this empty field and there's nothing around, and these turbines are spinning, and it just feels very weird and dystopian. And I thought about that when I read this passage, but it gives you a little hint about Ed's personality. For the last 80 miles, the county was wilder and wider and barer. There weren't as many trees, the houses were lower, and the sky was like something you'd see in a movie about aliens. It did that thing that happens a quarter of the way into the story, where the clouds start to bubble and speak, and the first few spots of rain threw themselves at the windshield. For the last few miles, I had to turn inland and drive through a flat and lonely place the aliens would have loved. They could have landed their spaceship there and no one would have known, and they could have sneaked into one of the farmhouses and stolen a healthy bloke to do their experiments on, and later, when they released him and returned to their planet, no one would have believed the story he told about the probes, because he was Eric from that wild place where hardly anything grows. Another thing that I love in this book is I have a thing about books with names, titles for the chapters, and this one has great title chapters. A numbered list of boats I have known. Eat that thing like a bad fist. Fat, naked pagan weirdos. Random minted lumps of metal. Warm pastry. The echo of a dead woman's whistling. I mean, every single chapter title is fantastic and makes you want to read that chapter to see where that fits in. And in case you can't surmise this already, I loved the Stromness dinner. And you do find out why it's called the Stromness dinner by the end of the book. You know it's going to take place partly in Stromness, but what was the dinner? You will find out. So that brings me up to my current reading. I'm reading 2 books right now. For the group read for Victober, I am reading The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. And it's divided into 3 or 4 chapters a day, and there's a discussion going on the Discord. So I'm staying in the spoiler-free section because I'm right on the track of the actual chapters of the day. I have not gotten ahead. I'm really enjoying it so far, and I haven't gotten too far yet, so I'm going to hold my comments until next week, until I have a bigger chunk of the book to talk about. But I really am liking it so far, and the careful way that all of the characters are being introduced. When you have a book this long, you have to just slow down and let it unfold and pay attention to what Trollope is saying about these characters, so that that's what I need to do, so that I can see where we're going with these people. All right, and finally, last but by no means least, I am almost at the end of The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride, and I am loving this book as well. It has been a really good couple of weeks. This book, so let me tell you a little bit about the book, and then I'll tell you about why I'm loving it and how it's making me feel. But it opens with briefly with a scene in the early 70s when some people that are excavating to make a new building discover a skeleton down where an old well used to be, and some items with the skeleton, and they go to question this old man who's one of the last remaining people from the community that used to be there, and they want to ask him some questions about what they found. And then a natural event interrupts. And we go back to the 1930s mainly, with a little bit in the 20s, but most of the story takes place in the 1930s in this community called Chicken Hill. And Chicken Hill is the area of town in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, where the Black and Jewish community live. Downhill in the downtown is where the rest of the white people live. But up on the hill, the Jewish community, the black community, and some Italians that are also disparaged by the other white people in town. They all live up in this community. And they peacefully coexist, and they try to minimize their interactions with the racist white folks in town. And most of the plot has to do with their efforts to shelter and protect a young black kid named Dodo who is deaf. And Dodo has had a series of misfortunes. There was a home accident with an exploding stove that robbed him of his hearing, and his mother passed away. And now the white folks in the town have gotten wind that there's a kid who doesn't attend school, and they want to put him in a state school, which everyone knows is really just a horrible institution. So they're trying to protect Dodo from this fate, and that sets off most of the events in the story. But at the heart of the story is the Heaven and Earth grocery store, which is run by Shona, who is a Jewish woman who is not interested in the boundaries imposed by the niceties of society. She will mix and mingle with anyone. She'll speak her mind about anything. She will write scathing letters to the newspaper about wrongdoing that she has witnessed. She doesn't care about what women should or shouldn't do. She's not interested in those kind of restrictions. And she has a loving and faithful husband named Moishe who runs a couple of music halls in town. But he is a more timid soul, and he is very rule bound. Don't cross authority, steer clear of conflict kind of thing. But he doesn't ever try to control or stifle Shona. And somehow she gets away with a lot of things just by her warm and generous personality. There's a large cast of characters. Even though it's not a very big community, every person is introduced in turn with a lot of backstory. So you cannot read this inattentively or too quickly, or you will miss some of the important interrelations and connections between all the people in this town. So that's what's going on. I have a big chunk left to finish, and I hope that I like the way that it turns out. But there's just, even though it's about some serious subject matter, there's just a buoyancy in the story, and this hopefulness as the people gain in their insight and in their courage and decide to step out of their comfort zones to solve this problem as a community. So I'm really enjoying the book, and after I finish that, I'll probably dip into one of my other Victober selections. What I have planned right now for my next video is a haul video, and that will be on Tuesday. But I hope that you have a great weekend and that you are reading something as good as what I am reading right now. Let me know what it is down below. If you've read any of these books and what you thought, or what's coming up for you in your reading this weekend. And until next time, I'm going. Bye. See you later.